Elden Ring, you thing of beauty, and you game of so many different places, some more worthwhile and stunning than others, no doubt. This is one of those games you'll never forget if you've truly spent time in it and conquered its lands between. But if you're anything like me, some places in this game will make your heart flutter in ways the rest just won't. And that's why in this video, we are ranking every area in Elden Ring from worst to best. Now first, a disclaimer. I've decided to merge some regions and their sub-areas for certain places where I see it fit, and I've also refrained from including any generic dungeons or caves as I don't really count them as regions on their own. And of course, this took a ton of work to put together, so I'd really appreciate it if you decided to leave a like, a comment with your thoughts. And did you know that only 0.5% of my viewers are actually subscribed to the channel? If you enjoy my content and want to support the channel, subscribing is really just about the kindest thing you can do, and truly means a lot. At number 37 and the worst area in Elden Ring is Fort of Reprimand. Now this might make you think I have some personal vendetta against this fort in particular and that I yearn to reprimand it, but that's not the case. Fort of Reprimand is just a relatively boring fort with little interesting stuff to it except for an interesting Ash of War. This is basically something of a tease of a fort, since when I approached it for the first time, I figured that it might lead me to somewhere else, but no. It's got a fairly useless site of grace in the back, and this exploration generally just doesn't feel like it leads too much. And that's pretty much it. And the only reason I count this as its own area is because it's counted as a minor legacy dungeon in the game. But oh, how minor it really is. At number 36, Rao Base is quite the anonymous area, located far below the ancient Rao ruins and below Shadow Altus. It took me forever to find out how to get here, only to realize that it actually wasn't that important of a place at all on its own, but I will give it credit for giving me a sense of awe as I entered into this valley and having to get to safety from the mecha giants preying on my downfall. It gives off a certain fall-like vibe. There is a big ruins area to the south and so on, which is an admittedly great soul farming spot, or ruins I guess, but you know, it just doesn't excite me. In fact, when I figured out that I was no closer in getting to anywhere, my amazement kind of fell off, especially when this cool mountainside temple turned out to not really be a temple at all. If Rao Base actually led to the Rao ruins, that would have been cool, but at least if you manage to notice these stone steps at the end of the cliff, which takes you to another much more exciting area, you'll get a lot out of this one. And that's its saving grace really, but since there are other ways to get to this separate place, it doesn't get many points for effort. Number 35, and we're looking at Castle Ensis. Now Castle Ensis is an interesting minor legacy dungeon. It requires you to move around its main gate to open it after some exploration. Its main enemies are the sharper than you think exiled soldiers, coupled with sorcerers later on, the return of the Carrion Knight, and a difficult lesser black knight guarding the final lift. It's not a particularly exciting design or anything, at least compared to what's to come, but it's a neat little dungeon that also happens to feature one of the coolest bosses in the game, Relana, which gives the castle a lot more gravitas and weight that it might have had otherwise. I do wish it had more story significance though, perhaps a few NPCs, and that Relana had played a bigger role prior to her boss fight. And all in all, that's why Castle Ensis lands at spot 35. The fact that Enir Ilim lands at spot 34 is a shame in my eyes, since its reveal is one of the coolest things in the whole game. Sadly though, the place itself just doesn't do it for me. It basically looks like a dupe of Leyndell in many ways, but without the intricate city streets, layer designs, and sense of awe. In addition, it features some of the most frustrating enemies in the game, the Divine Beast Warriors, who will completely murk you seemingly at random with unbeatable poise or massive AoE spells. The first time I met these guys, I beat them fairly easily actually, but then afterwards I just couldn't seem to do it again. Call me get good, but still, I find them extremely frustrating in a way other late game and tough enemies are not. So in my opinion, it drags down the experience of this place. Of course, it does feature the awesome showdown with the NPCs of the DLC, but as is often the case with FromSoft games, I wish there were more in terms of story here, and perhaps that the place felt awe-inspiring in the way Leyndell, the Shadow Keep, or the Halig Tree does. At least there's a really cool vista shot at the top of the jagged peak and everything else. At number 33, awaits the Volcano Manor, and it lands at this spot because I have some very personal beef with this place. First of all, let's talk about the good stuff. My first meeting with the manor was magical. I was abducted by one of the abductor virgins and found myself in the middle of a volcano with no way to actually get to the manor legally, so to speak. Of course, since I am a gentleman helping Raya, she was kind enough to teleport me straight there. Volcano Manor is a pretty dreary place when all is said and done, feeling like one of the most evil places you visit in Elden Ring in terms of sheer human design. Its red and dark features signify the twisted mind of Rykard and the somewhat murderous crowd that call the manor their home. I do like its fairly intricate design though of dark dungeons and the presence of lava on the surface, but sadly, despite having several hundred hours in Elden Ring, I've never actually finished the manor questline, because it's somehow possible, without any real warning, to attack and kill Rykard, which automatically cancels the entire questline. Now that itself doesn't take away from the manor's vibe or anything, but it did leave a bad taste in my mouth. I'm also not a big fan of the extremely dreary exterior of the manor, which is arguably one of the most foul in the game. And so, despite a few cool hallways, volcanic vistas, and an actual cast of characters, Volcano Manor lands at spot 33, although I'm very much open to revisit my ranking here once I actually finish this questline. At spot 32 is one of Elden Ring's scariest areas, Abyssal Woods. The cool thing about Abyssal Woods is how much it leans into being an extremely dark, forgotten, and just mystical place, with enemies who will literally one-shot you if you get caught in their sights. The fact that Torrent is too scared to move in here is also quite a chill smaxer. Sadly though, in terms of gameplay, I find the area to be severely lacking. After just a few minutes, it became obvious how large and empty this area was, and since we're just on foot here, it felt more like a wasted empty space rather than a frightening dark wood. If Abyssal Woods had been smaller, or its corridors tighter, and the path to Midra's Manse shorter, I think it would have made things a lot more interesting. It's also a massive shame that there's no added features here if you are actually the Lord of the Frenzied Flame, and I wish the area had actual NPCs and more of a story connected to it, because I think it would help in giving it more heart, and make it even more frightening to meet people who've lived here or gone mad in this forest where there is no sunshine. So as it stands now, I can respect the idea and find the whole thing oddly frightening and fascinating, but it just doesn't reach its full potential. At number 31 we have Mount Gelmir. Mount Gelmir is kind of what I referred to earlier when I mentioned the Volcano Manor's dreary exterior. That's kind of what this is. It's stinky and is often either muddy or battlefield affected. It's an upward or downward route of plague-ridden giant enemies, abductor virgins, or whatever else the place throws at you, and it's overall not a pretty place. I do find it interesting, however, to arrive here and feel like you've made it so far from where you began, and being abducted here by the virgins did give me one of those Elden Ring awe-like experiences once you left the volcano itself. In this way, its rather unwelcoming exterior feels natural, since you are so far away from home as it were, so in a way I kinda like it. However, since the vibe just isn't it, and it can feel fairly generic at times, and fielding arguably the latest fort in the game, it lands at spot 31. At spot number 30, we have Bellerat Tower Settlement, which, wow, I guess there's been a ton of DLC regions here so far, and more there will be. Bellerat is essentially the first and arguably only city region you'll find in the Shadow Realm, and in some ways does remind me more of Leyndell than even Aenir Ilum does. I found its layout fairly interesting. The presence of giant spiders gives the odd nice shock, although I certainly could do without those divine warriors or whatever, because they do hit mighty hard, and I freaking hate that twirling gangster in the staircase before the area boss, but yeah, at least it's challenging. However, the city's design itself isn't necessarily all that interesting. It appears rather gray and colorless, features a pretty nasty sewage-like area, but one that doesn't really lead anywhere, and even though I enjoy jumping on rooftops as much as the next guy, there is just not enough verticality or hidden paths and mystery here to make it that memorable of a place. Oh, and I absolutely hate the lion dancer boss on top, but I am a big fan of the staircase leading up to the hidden city after it. At number 29, we have Shadowview, the area in the DLC that I believe took me the longest to find due to missing a simple elevator. Shadowview is essentially the region behind the Shadow Keep, and includes the chalice itself and a great view of the Shadow Tree. It features an entire region hidden behind a statue, which includes the awesome and fabled Shaman Village, the Finger Ruins of Deo, and a massive and fairly empty swath of land between the two, with a lot of fingers, fingering around. It's a fairly beautiful piece of land when all is said and done, and even though the chalice region is way too empty for my tastes, I do love how mysterious the Shaman Village feels. However, to rank even higher, the region should have had more NPCs, and the Finger Ruins should have been more interesting than ringing a simple horn. I do enjoy that the region is technically involved in the Mother of Fingers plotline though, since you do need to reach beyond the Shaman Village and then jump down to Rabath's Rise to advance part of that plotline. All in all, a fairly mid location, sometimes disappointing, but with a few very cool moments. It does sadden me to place Jagged Peak at number 28, but when all is said and done, there just isn't much here for me. Sure, it's cool and special to run up a massive mountain while red lightning and smoke is all around you, and fighting giant dragons or jumping on dead ones isn't all that bad either. You do feel like you're doing something different here after all. But I do find it to be too empty and soulless, almost like FromSoft added this region just because they wanted you to fight Bale and spend more time in the game, but forgot to add charm and substance to it. Because neither is it as minimalist and memorable as Dark Souls Ash Lake, nor as intricate and interesting as more complex regions. And therefore, it doesn't deserve much better than this. At number 26 awaits Weeping Peninsula, this rainy, ever-cloudy region south of Limgrave where things are just mostly dreary, but there are some legitimately cool things here too. The quest involving Irena and her father, which later turns into something else entirely, the Black Knight riding at night, the giant shooting arrows at you from afar, and the towering Castle Morne itself is a sight to behold. And yes, there is the odd poisonous area here and there, but what's so interesting to me is that this peninsula really does open up as long as you take the road away from the castle once you pass the Bridge of Sacrifice. Suddenly you find this open landscape, this massive creature prancing around, a church on the hill, mysterious ruins guarded by a ball of faces, and this long beach filled with disgusting zombies. It's creepy and ominous and sad, and we're left wondering what truly happened here. And despite technically being its own minor legacy dungeon, I will include Castle Morne as part of the Weeping Peninsula area as it pertains to this ranking list, since I find it so integral and inseparable from it, both narratively, visually, and in terms of atmosphere. As such, Castle Morne is one of my least favorite legacy dungeons because it's rather short and visually uninteresting, at least on the internal side of things. But what I do like is the boss room on the other side of it, because here, at the southernmost tip of the world, you can actually see all the way up past Stormwell Castle at Mount Gelmir, which is insane to think about and an absolute beautiful visual feast. However, the region itself is one I find extremely unappealing and I generally dislike being there, which is why we find it at number 27. At number 26 we have Midra's Manse, the manor house of Midra, Lord of Frenzy, which is tucked nicely deep in the Abyssal Woods. Midra's Manse is a minor legacy dungeon in the Land of Shadow, and it is indeed relatively short compared to the likes of the true legacy dungeons. But what it lacks in length, it does make up for in atmosphere and uniqueness. Midra's Manse is one of the scariest places in the game to me because it oozes that frenzied madness atmosphere you'll get nowhere else. I love how it has a kind of narrative built into it as well, with the outskirts being as ominous as you can imagine, the inside being this labyrinth of decaying bookcases, monsters awaiting, and just this pressing sensation of something being terribly wrong. At the end awaits Midra himself, of course, this agonizing Lord of Frenzy who's been left all alone after his companion Nanya left him and told him to endure this never-ending pain to perhaps one day attain lordship. In this way, the manse has a strong sense of personality and sickening charm to it. On the other hand, I do wish it was larger. I wish it had more verticality to it in terms of underground areas and perhaps even a link to another area entirely. Something nobody even knew about except Midra himself perhaps, who of course is incapable of actually using it. I also think once more it's a shame that being the Lord of Frenzy yourself does nothing for either the enemies or the boss fight in this scenario, and I think it would be awesome if being the Frenzy Lord yourself would indeed allow you to open a passage to elsewhere, give you a massive boost to fighting Midra, make all the enemies in this region subservient to you, or something else like that. At number 25 awaits Greyall Dragon Barrow, a smaller region that technically is part of Caelid, but which has been designated its own area. This is likely because it in many ways sits atop Caelid in terms of elevation and is different in that it's not technically as infested with scarlet rot as the rest of Caelid, but instead it's infested with the dragons who fled the rot. Now I will admit that Caelid is one of my least favorite regions because it's Elden Ring's literal embodiment of hell, and because the Dragon Barrow is a smaller, less meaningful version of it, it's natural for it to be placed lower on the list. However, it does feature dragons as mentioned, which makes it unique. Its Divine Tower is especially interesting in terms of its verticality and challenge. It features the unique Bestial Sanctum building, which makes it important, and Fort Fareth, where you gain a valuable half of the Lift of Dectus medallion. At number 24, the Deep-Root Depths is an interesting location, but not necessarily one I like a lot. I find the proverbial depth extremely interesting, reminding me a bit of the trail ever deeper into the earth in Dark Souls 1. However, I kinda wish the nameless Eternal City was more interesting. I love that there's a whole city down here, but there's just not that much here except for its many buildings, super annoying petrifying lizards, fire-breathing monster statues, and the headless Mausoleum Knights. And the Mausoleum. Of course, the coolest thing about this place is the Prince of Death's throne, both in its visual flair and its meaning to Fia and Dee's questline, but its very brown and earthy tones makes the whole thing quite forgetful, and despite its claim to depth, it doesn't feel quite as ominous nor as mysterious as I would have liked. At number 23, we're going even deeper into the earth to the Lake of Rot, a horrible place if you like to enjoy your life, but a very interesting one in terms of atmosphere and visual uniqueness. Despite being underground, the space is wide open and easily accessible had it not been for the dangerously painful literal Lake of Rot. But I still can't help but love the way it looks, and the existential dread of seeing monsters moving in the distance but not knowing exactly what hides in the fog is really cool. Further, we have the visually exciting racing of ancient ruins and the journey into the Grand Cloister, a beautiful and dangerous place that was once a grand ornate temple, now home to monsters of many kinds and even a massive terrible beast. And of course, the lake reaches even further down, to Astel Naturalborn of the Void, which once more leads to one of the game's most hidden in plain sight and cool locations. Despite all of this, I don't love hanging around Lake of Rot for obvious reasons. It doesn't exactly give me good vibes and isn't particularly interesting in its gameplay design, since mostly the lake itself is arguably about being able to absorb damage without dying. Now, I've heard a lot of people don't care much for Consecrated Snowfield, but if the number 22 spot on this list tells you anything, I think it's neat. It's one of those places that you feel truly in awe of when you finally reach, because you are initially able to see it from the mountaintop of the giants but have no idea how to get there. For the most part, the snowfield is a vast open space, often hidden behind fog or thick snowstorms. It's mysterious and otherworldly, and very different from other areas of the game. I'm also very partial to snow regions as a Norwegian. But more than that, the mystery is further elevated by the little town of Ordina, whose trial of navigating through its streets of invisible assassins is quite the nugget. But doing so also reveals one of the game's biggest secrets. It's also very interesting that there is a sending gate here which sends you straight to Mogwin's palace and the final location of the long-winded mission involving the Albinaurics, meaning this is an important place for many reasons. But on its own, it's not necessarily the most fun of places. The limited field of use means its beauty is limited, no pun intended, there are few NPCs here, and except for the locations it leads to, a region on its own isn't necessarily an end in itself. As such, it lands on spot 22. Graveside Plain is Shadow of the Erdtree's opening region, and it is as large as it is awe-inspiring. The sight of the massive Shadow of the Erdtree in the distance, the mountains to its side, and everything between is spectacular and really sets the mood for what this realm at spot number 21 is all about. Meeting one of those big furnace monsters for the first time, seeing places you have no idea how to get to, and meeting new personalities you're excited to meet again, Graveside Plain has a lot of things going for it. At the same time though, I don't find myself exactly comfortable in this atmosphere. It's very clearly a dying, forgotten place, one hidden away from the light of the sun and any happiness whatsoever. There is a lot to find and like here, but because of its vast open spaces that can be categorized as fairly empty, many rewards which feel like letdowns, and its oppressive atmosphere, it's far from my favorite region, and doesn't harbor as many surprises as some of the other regions in the Shadow Realm. At number 20, we have the Shadow Altus, the arguably even more oppressive region of this realm. At the same time though, I find its use of contrast and light absolutely striking. The appearance of the deep black shadow keep is almost ever present and reminds me of Barad-dûr. The various cathedrals placed here and there, including that of Manus Metyr, are gorgeous. Bonny Village is miserable and creepy but meaningful, and we once again have interesting NPCs to meet here. However, Shadow Altus does in many respects feel like more of a gateway to fun elsewhere than a fun place to be on its own. I mean, the Shadow Keep is right there, and from there a whole world of excitement awaits. Before the Shadow Altus, you're likely to mainly return for the NPC sites of Graces, whether on the plateau itself or the Cathedral of Manus. At number 19, we are returning to familiar spaces, namely Castle Stormveil. Castle Stormveil is probably going to be one of the first proper legacy dungeons you encounter, and it is finally a proper one. Defeating Margit is tough for any aspiring Tarnished, but a great intro to what awaits here. Stormvale's walls are beautiful and striking, looking like something straight out of a medieval fantasy England or something, and I love how they are just as recognizable whether seen from Limgrave, from right outside, or from Liurnia. You really always know where Stormvale lies. Now personally, I am actually not that big a fan of Stormvale, as it's kind of creepy and generally has a dark and crafty atmosphere. And ironically, its least inspired part are its insides. That being said, I do like part of what it does. It begins by giving you the option of taking the dangerous part head on through the main gate, where you'll likely be skewered by incoming ballista fire, or the secret path, where you'll have to balance your way up the side, making your way past scheming enemies in the dark, before you're back to classic Dark Souls way of activating lifts, jumping on rooftops, and making it back in a looping fashion to create shortcuts. There are 3 parts to Stormvale that trumps everything else though, and that is the dark and rickety path down to the remains of the Prince of Death, or whatever you want to call it, the divine tower that's connected to its courtyard and looks stunning, and its ultimate end, the defeat of Godric, which leads to the part of the game that made Elden Ring so special to me. As such, Stormvale is basically baby's first legacy dungeon, and getting through it basically means that you are ready for what the rest of the game might throw at you. At number 18, we have the bachelor pad of a very special boss, Mog, and the place where I wanted to go so badly forever, but never reached before I truly had to. Mogwyn's palace is in many ways a part of the region of Nokron, but is so far apart and reaching it from Nokron is impossible, so I had to treat it as its own thing. While a relatively small region on its own, it is an exciting one. From having to scale its mountainsides, unraveling its mysteries and different minor areas, to dealing with the White Mask Vare, and finally, the anticipation of what awaits at the top, the Lord of Blood himself, and that egg with the hand, followed by an unbeatable view of the rest of Nokron below. To me, it's this mishmash of beautiful colors, the calm but mysterious musical atmosphere of Nokron, and the joy of actually getting here that brings it all together, despite the place's relatively small size and lack of other story-based interactions. At number 17 awaits Limgrave, the starting region of any and all Elden Ring adventures. Limgrave is vast, especially if you include the Weeping Peninsula, which we do not, but even on its own, the first area with the Church of LA, the beach region below with the single walking giant, the ruins and steps up towards Castle Stormvale, the region next to it below the Divine Tower Bridge, the path toward Liurnia if you dare to make the jump, the dragon-burnt ruins, the mysterious and vast Mistwood, and we must not forget the one and only Great Kennet Height. Limgrave features the constantly gorgeous view of Castle Stormvale, great sunsets, and arguably my favorite spot in the region, the Third Church of Marika. However, I've actually never liked Limgrave all that much. It comes across to me as a fairly bland place without its own identity for the most part, except for the Mistwood and the area around the Divine Bridge. And for a starting area, I really wish the music could have been a bit more hummable, so there's just not that much here that does it for me. I do, however, respect it greatly for actually offering a secret passage to Liurnia, for daring to put a beast of a tree sentinel, a giant, and a dragon just seconds away from each other depending on the direction you walk in, and for allowing you to quite literally wander into Caelid, one of the toughest areas in the game right from the get-go. And speaking of Caelid, it takes spot number 16. Caelid is enormous, terrifying, disgusting, creepy, stinky, tough as nails, and literally wants nothing to do with you. But it is also a place of great discovery, mystery, history, and long-stretching NPC questlines. Its constant red tint, giant skulls, disgusting creatures, and whatever else will give you hell on earth vibes. So if you, like me, is something of a scaredy cat, this will probably be a tough area to comb through. However, it's also fascinating in its depravity, and I especially like Celia Town of Sorcery, deep within the region and on the opposite side of the Swamp of Aeonia. That being said, I freaking hate this region on a personal level and never want to spend more time here than I have to, even though I can definitely see its many merits on a gameplay and lore level. At number 15 lands crumbling Farum Azula, that hidden city in the sky where dragons, undead werewolf people, and destined death awaits. Seeing as it's literally in the sky, constantly surrounded by roaming drakes and whatnot, it definitely offers a striking look, its ruins held up by some kind of magic or the ever-present whirlwind storms themselves. Now the CFA is a legacy dungeon and is one of the bigger ones finally, and it really shows it too. There are multiple paths here, a number of different enemy types and challenges, a few hidden paths or loops to open, and finding some of these secrets is generally fun. The architecture on display here is gorgeous as well, and you're constantly left wondering what this place looked like in its prime. I also love the fact that there's an entirely hidden area here. First because you have to find the hidden mountainside pathway from below its cliff, and second because you have to strike a pose in a specific spot in order to be transported to a time way in the past to a new area only to fight one of the most powerful dragon bosses in the game. And in these ways, you do feel like you're somewhere very special here. However, the reason why this place is not higher up is because of a few key aspects. I wish it was possible to arrive here without having to be magically transported here by Melina. I think despite its cool concept, that the place itself is kind of boring looking in its color scheme, seeing as most of the image here will be white, brown or gray, and despite a few cool loop concepts or secret areas, I actually don't find it all that fun to traverse. The whole thing feels a bit too much like a gauntlet to me in a purely struggle way, rather than an interesting one if that makes sense. If I had it my way, I think I would have cut some of the larger open areas and replaced them with more tighter corridors and passageways to uncover, because I think its openness might be throwing me off a bit here in terms of immersion and a sense of awe when the game actually reveals those larger arenas. At number 14, we have a smaller area, but still one that stuck with me, namely the Moonlight Altar. The Moonlight Altar remained a mystery to me for so long because it's literally shown to you right away the moment you enter Liurnia of the Lakes, but you have no way to reach it no matter what you do or where you explore. It's just too high up. In fact, it's only accessible through the Lake of Rot and the boss room of Estelle like we talked about earlier, and finally walking through that cave and reaching this place high atop the world from what seemingly is the bottom is that magic that only FromSoft does so incredibly well. This is a region ever covered in the proverbial moonlight, a blue tint and glittering stardust that's always present, giving it a magical feeling. The cathedral at its top is something to behold indeed, and seeing as it's the final location of Ranni's questline gives it further gravitas. There are more secrets here, whether we're talking about the tower, the Everjail, which features an actual assassin boss, or its many dragons or hidden locations in its ruins. But for me, I just love the atmosphere of this area. Of course, as mentioned, there isn't all that much here. I kinda wish its ruins were better intact to show off the civilization that used to live here way back when, and it would have been fun if the place actually features some kind of legacy dungeon. In other words, you won't be spending all that much time here, but you'll definitely remember how special it truly is. Caria Manor and the accompanying Three Sisters Towers take spot number 13, and this is another example of me choosing to combine locations since I do feel like they belong together. The Caria Manor is beautiful and unique, bathing in a same-ish magical hue as the Moonlight Altar, and for good reason, but it also features unique enemies. This is likely the first place you'll encounter the magical hands in this game, and seeing them for the first time is creepy as can be. I like the unique run-up to the castle, which forces you to navigate a magical defense system. I think the castle has some cool exploration, which sees you try to traverse its lower grounds before entering its towers and walls, before you reach ever higher and higher until you're so high up that it feels like the entire world lies before you. Passing the boss in the beautiful courtyard, you finally reach the arguably even more mystical Three Sisters Towers, this ethereal and mysteriously quiet place, yet one inhabited by a single dragon you best avoid. The three towers open at various points of course, but they all contain secrets and important parts of the story. First and foremost, Ranni's tower, where the princess herself and her feet await. Would it be nice if there were more secrets here? Perhaps if the castle had a secret vast dungeon that somehow led to the academy itself? Yes, absolutely, but I think what's here is strong enough, earning it spot number 13. One of the absolute coolest concepts in Elden Ring is stumbling upon an entirely new area that looks and feels drastically different from where you just were, and few areas does this better than the Cerulean Coast at spot 12. You'll notice that it's been 3 in a row with that ethereal glow now, and that's because I think it's just such a beautiful, mysterious, and great way to create a unique environment that feels special. Cerulean Coast was one of the last areas I finally managed to find in the DLC, even though I'd been trying to find it for hours and hours. So the feeling of just knowing you were on the right path and finally finding it was amazing. This place is like a sea of blue flowers and ethereal lights, feeling like a completely different world almost, and I love it. Exploring it is dangerous though, but what I love is that it also contains the relatively hidden underground stone coffin fissure region, which is incredibly visually unique and literally made my jaw drop when I first found it. This makes this entire place and its sub-areas so unique and mystical, with the Cerulean Coast itself arguably being the Shadow Realm's lowest point, with the coffin fissure reaching even further down. That being said, I wish this place had more story significance on its own, that there were more valuable rewards here with more NPCs and more unique enemies, because as it stands, it does kind of feel like a region that was added to pad the world out without a ton of its own depth, except of course for its beautiful visual identity. At number 11, I've chosen to combine the Altus Plateau and Capital Outskirts into one, as I find that to be a natural pairing in terms of the region outside Leyndell. The Altus Plateau is in many ways in itself proof of the fact that you have made it far, and the visual themes of this place proves it. The grand walls of Leyndell, the ethereal banners raised high all over this place, the signs of war, sieges, and dug-in positions tell of a place that has seen battle and its own share of conflicts, and this is all just close to the capital itself. Because we also have a mystical wood filled with disgusting vomit monsters whose designer must have been truly sick in the noggin. We have this creepy as can be Swedish-style Midsommar windmill villages filled with dancing undead ladies that I'm sure once upon a time were the dream of any heterosexual male tarnished, and we have the inside of Leyndell's outer walls, a fairly majestic place which interestingly have two entrances. The easy but long route one, where you have to navigate enemy trebuchet fire and defeat yet another freaking Margit boss, and then immediately face another boss to have some sense of peace while inside, or the hard one, where you make your way through the main gate up a long gauntlet filled with multiple tree sentinel mini-bosses. It's up to you, but no matter which path you take, this place serves some epic sights and moments. The reason this place isn't even higher on this list is because I wish it had even more spectacular sights to it. I think it would have been awesome to see actual active sites of battle, with enemy hordes of monsters still trying to take Leyndell somehow, and this being an active battlefield rather than just seeing the army with its dug-in positions. And the fights could have been larger versions of a similar one found in Liurnia of the Lakes, but with more diverse units, trebuchet fire, perhaps even mounted knights and whatever else in the mix, and for even longer stretches. I also think that it would have been cool to meet even more NPCs here, and honestly, I think the reward for actually making it past the gauntlet to the city is a bit disappointing, since I feel like it also should have allowed us to somehow enter the city itself from its main gate in this location. We are in the top 10 of the list right now, and at number 10, we find the Ainsel River locations. The Ainsel River and its variations are in my opinion some of the coolest places in the game, namely because I find it so fascinating to imagine exploring an entire world underground. Of course, the ways you get here is awesome too, because you're basically always doing so through these so-called wells that take you deep into the earth in one location, leads you somewhere, and often allows you to get back up in a completely different place. It's such a testament to how well Elden Ring's world is designed, and despite this place often being made up of what amounts to tunnel scouting, shallow water, and old ruins, I just can't seem to get enough of it. On the other hand, I do once again feel like I'm not rewarded quite enough for exploring these places. The thing about Elden Ring is that it rarely feels as worth it in terms of items and rewards as the Soul series did. So whereas you mostly gain cool loot from certain bosses or random enemies in Elden Ring, the loot you gain from exploring the dark corners of the world is often reduced to crafting materials or cookbooks. Now obviously you're gonna want crafting materials, but getting some flowers or whatever is never going to be as cool as consistently finding cool weapons or armor or even hidden spells. I also think these places would have benefited from once again featuring more minor NPCs with their own minor storylines, because as it stands, they can feel a bit empty in terms of actual narrative meaning, except perhaps for lore or geographic history. At number 9 awaits the eternal city of Nokstella, the dark and scary section of the underworld. Just like with the Ainsel River, Nokstella is located far beneath the surface and can really only be reached through special means and pathways. Nokstella often features a mystical purple theme, a tad darker than its counterpart, which we will get to later, and somehow it feels colder too. That doesn't take away from its magic, however, and its architecture, certain platformy sections of making your way across rooftops or beams, and the odd massive statue of an old dead guy. There's also one of the unironically most freaky parts in the game, those giant Indiana Jones style balls that literally chase you as far as they can and hurt badly. I will say that Nokstella 2 should have had more NPCs in it. In fact, I do believe it's one of the only areas with no NPCs at all, and for such a big place, that does take away from its importance as a location. And because it's such a gloomy and inhospitable place with a dark atmosphere and music, I don't find myself all too comfortable here, so I'm not likely to linger any longer than I have to. At number 8, we have reached Mountaintop of the Giants. I love this location for its snow. It's such a refreshing change of pace and scenery from virtually everything else in the game. And contrary to Consecrated Snowfield, you can for the most part actually see what's going on here. Despite not being as directly ethereal as say the Carian Manor or Cerulean Coast, the silent winter atmosphere still gives this place a mesmerizing and almost mysteriously calm vibe, and I am absolutely here for it. But even more than that, the mountaintops is a vast region and often feels like it just goes on and on, from its relatively modest beginnings to the once-in-a-game type vistas of a massive stone pathway bridging its various mountaintops, Castle Sol tucked away in the snowy landscape and literally giving us a peek at the mystery that awaits below, a frozen, foggy lake that sees a dragon come out of nowhere and attack you, to the last fire giant itself, and of course the highest peak in the game, the giant cauldron from where the Erdtree is burned. It's definitely tough to top this one. However, the mountaintops could have perhaps made use of more interesting music, it definitely could have featured more NPCs that were unique to this region, except Shabriri perhaps, a few more actually unique enemies would have been nice, and I wouldn't have minded if the castles and ruins here looked or felt a bit more unique, because as this is a place of giants, you could imagine that things might have been built a bit different up here. At number 7, and we're finally back to the realm of shadow with the ancient ruins of Rau. This is arguably the one and only bright spot in this entire place, which is why I love it so. It's such a stark contrast from everything else in this world, partially because it's located somewhere above the clouds, so the sun actually shines. And when I walked through that dark passageway of the Shadow Keep and finally saw this green and ancient land, I felt like I was experiencing a second Liurnia of the Lakes type moment. You've just gone through so much darkness and depravity and disgusting potted people of all things, and then you can suddenly kind of breathe again, absorb the fresh air, gorgeous sundowns, and just live. Sure, there are some dangerous mausoleum-type labyrinths in here. These are massive ancient ruins after all, dangerous mini-boss enemies, a giant with a bow trying to take you down, and a freaking furnace giant here as well. And yeah, my most hated enemy type, the dancing lion. But other than that, it's great. I love that you have to find your way ever higher, to the point where you have to think creatively and drop down to this classic Souls-like balancing act where you traverse these structures high above ground, and that it all ultimately leads to a church and the place where you can make the hidden city appear. Sadly, as with many of the DLC areas, the ancient ruins of Rau kind of fails in the rewards department, sometimes feeling just pointless or disappointing and not featuring any new NPCs. And even though I find it an interesting place, it doesn't reach the comforting or mesmerizing heights of some of the higher ranked places on this list. At number 6, we have arrived at Leyndell Royal Capital, and for this one, we are bringing together a bunch of areas that I personally feel should all be counted as Leyndell Royal Capital, which means the city itself, the city in its ashen state, the Leyndell Catacombs and the subterranean shunning grounds, and finally the Frenzied Flame Prescription, because these latter places are all literally Leyndell's underground late night scene. Leyndell is a beautiful city, well, as beautiful as a post-apocalyptic partially destroyed city can be anyway. From its walls high above to the city streets below, this is a truly massive place, encompassing everything from in-house skirmishes to scaling giant vines ensnaring its main towers, to a large coliseum, and of course, that gorgeous visual of the Erdtree, and since you're here, the ability to finally enter it, once you have the proper admissions of course. There is a sense of awe as you walk these streets, a sense of wrongness that so much has gone so wrong that even a city as strong and defensible as this one has essentially collapsed. A massive dragon lies dead atop its houses, and wherever you go, tough as nails enemies, few or many, are there to stop you from moving forward. Above the surface, I think my two favorite places here are first, at the very top, a large bedchamber without a resident, because it feels like someone should be here, and the presence of this place makes it feel like a god's residence, kinda like that Filianor place in DS3. And second, a bit below, we find a building that somehow looks completely identical to the Round Table Hold. This to me was a shock to find, and absolutely one of the biggest mysteries in Elden Ring. What does this mean for the lore? What implications does this have for the Round Table Hold? Does our Round Table exist outside of space and time? Are they related somehow? Or are they simply modeled by the same designer? Personally, I have no idea, and without having looked up any lore videos on this, I do remain in the dark. But freaking awesome I do find it, and I always will. Go underground though, and an entirely different, darker aspect of Leyndell reveals itself. First, the lower part of the city is creepy on its own despite not even being underground yet, but dive into this inconspicuous well and you find the catacombs, the so-called subterranean shunning grounds. This place is downright disgusting. I hate being here, and I always seem to get lost. But all that aside, I really love the creepy, mysterious, and dark feel of this place. How it just never stops throwing challenges your way, and how it plays around with shortcuts and opening doors and gateways. This is of course the place where you finally find the filthy poop man, or whatever his name is, the loathsome dung eater, who's likely by far the most vile and abhorrent person in this entire universe. But more importantly, and crucially to why this place is so gosh darn good and extra mysterious, is because of the Forsaken Depths, a place even further down than the Shunning Grounds, which you'll find by rummaging through a labyrinth of pipes. This is where you'll find Mohg the Omen, a difficult boss encounter, and an illusion created by the real Mohg Lord of Blood. You fight him in the Cathedral of the Forsaken, but look closer after the fight and you'll find an illusory wall at the back of the church. This leads you even further down. If you make it past the hundreds of corpses littering the way, manage to balance your way across unsteady beams, parkouring down hundreds of meters on various coffins until you finally make it to the bottom, to the Frenzied Flame Prescription, a dark and quiet place where if you have done your Finger Maiden mission correctly, have the ability to become the Lord of Frenzy yourself. And what's even cooler is that this isn't even the bottom. You can in fact open an illusory wall here too, and make it even further down to the Deeproot Depths. It's all so freaking insane honestly, and is a testament to the amazing design of this world and to Leyndell as a capital. I've gone on and on about the positives of this place, and there are many, but it's still not at the very top, and I think it's because of a few reasons. First of all, for a place that's kind of supposed to be the crescendo of this game, I just don't really get the same feeling of dread or danger as I get in, say, Castle Lothric at the end of Dark Souls 3. Even when the capital is laid in ash, it basically gets transformed into a barren wasteland with little to see, and I think that's a massive shame, especially again compared to DS3, where the final section of that game sees Lothric reveal an entirely new city up above essentially, while the sky gets a dark red makeover to boot. Obviously here the Erdtree's on fire. I, once again, and I know this gets tiring to hear by now, wish there were more NPCs here. Like, come on, kinda. And even though it's not technically Leyndell's fault, I do think it's a shame that Elden Ring has sending gates that teleport you to one of the city's towers early on in the game if you happen upon it, since this does really take away from that feeling of finally seeing Leyndell for the very first time. We have arrived at the top 5 best areas in Elden Ring, and beginning with number 5, we find the Shadow Keep. The Shadow Keep is Shadow of the Erdtree's quintessential legacy dungeon. It's kind of the place around which so much else revolves, from hard to get areas to downright secret regions. The Shadow Keep towers over this realm like an Elden Ring version of Lothric Castle from Dark Souls 3 or Sauron's Dark Citadel from Lord of the Rings. And what's so fascinating about it is that simply completing its main route, which first takes you to Mesmer and then later to the Burn Ceiling Tree, will leave so much unexplored. In fact, when I first played the DLC, I went in many different directions before walking the arguably intended path to Mesmer first. Indeed, there are 2 main paths inside the castle, but once there and through exploration, you basically have 5 different paths to take, at least 4 of which leads you to areas outside of the castle itself, like the amazing flower boss below the Shadow Tree, the Commander Guy's fight and the Shaman Village area, the Abyssal Woods, and of course the ancient Ra ruins. If this wasn't fantastic by itself, I love how intricate the inside and almost labyrinth-like design awaits you here, forcing you to traverse a sunken church district, which you later have to drain to fully get immersed, run and jump across statues hanging in the air to get ever higher, and to balance and fight your way across wooden beams high above the ground to hopefully reach a new area you have yet to see. I also love that this place features NPCs you've previously met in the DLC, like Ansbach and Freya, even though it could have offered a few new ones as well. Shadowkeep is on its own arguably the best legacy dungeon in the entire game, but the reason it's not higher does in the end come down to atmosphere and my personal preference. This is after all a dark and fairly creepy place with a mostly simple color palette, and even though it does feature some beautiful and unique sights, it's all covered in the aura of this dark place and its proximity to the Shadow Tree, because as its name suggests, this is a shadowy and dark keep at its heart. Fun to play through and explore, yes, but it's also not a place that feels particularly otherworldly or fresh in ways I would have liked. At number 4, and arguably the most hidden location in the game, we have Miquella's Halig Tree and the city of Elphael. Not only is it an absolute gem to find this massive, completely optional region towards the end of the game at the far reaches of Consecrated Snowfield through working out a puzzle, which means this is a locked secret area literally within another secret area. But it's also absolutely amazing in and of itself. Enter it for the first time, and you have to scale these giant vines where you may or may not encounter oversized ants and other oddities, but its surrounding beauty and unusual space is what's going to grab your attention. Move further down, and you'll make it to this city-like structure that circles a giant main tree. Its architecture almost elvish in nature. The way down is dangerous though, but make it far down enough and you'll see something even more crazy. An entire city, not so different from Leyndell in many ways, and featuring similar kinds of soldiers. You're going to have to fight your way through this labyrinth of monsters and setups, but there's something even further in here. A stream of rot and a hidden temple-like structure that houses one of the game's toughest bosses, Millennia. Of course, this region is also the location of the end of a massively long and absurdly convoluted questline, which also ties together with another location if you wish to, say, stop being the Lord of Frenzied Flame. This entire city and region, as if a new civilization was supposed to thrive here but never got the chance to. And because this place houses its very own hidden remembrance boss and ties into different plot lines, it gives it an extra sense of mystery and worth as well. I think adding 1 or 2 unique NPCs to this region could have been interesting though, kinda like that bug guy in the Ringed City in DS3, and getting even more information on Miquella and the family overall would have been awesome, since as with so much in Elden Ring, I feel like the player is constantly left looking things up elsewhere for even basic knowledge. We have made it to the top 3 areas in all of Elden Ring, and at 3rd place for the bronze medal, we find the Academy of Raya Lucaria. Ever since I saw Raya Lucaria from those cliffs overlooking Liurnia of the Lakes, I knew this was a place I was going to love. It's massive, fairytale looking, and appears as if taken straight out of a mix between Harry Potter and Anne Orlando, and features large magical gates you can't even pass through without the proper key. In this way, entering the Academy itself becomes a puzzle, and I'm always a fan of things like that. It would have been even cooler though if one could enter it via the cave below, which actually takes you up into one of the Academy's highest towers, but sadly with no way down, which is a shame in my opinion. However, as you enter this Academy's top side for the first time, you're greeted by this amazing front castle. Its large rounded windows up top, an ethereal bluish veil that seems to surround and penetrate the air, and importantly, this slightly creepy but also fascinatingly charming theme tune that just oozes magic and mystery. I love that the Academy doesn't just offer beautiful inside spaces like the first church space you enter, but also makes you time your jumps and movements as you scale giant water wheels in the darkness, make your way across rooftops as you face unpredictable enemies, navigate the inside of this Academy, and face a host of wizards with strange masks for faces, defeat a giant freaking wolf fox thing in a big classroom before entering the upper courtyard only to need to go even further up, and at every point, this place just feels so otherworldly. I mentioned how the Academy feels as though it's taking place within its own space kind of, and it's very much because of this mystical, magical shroud that surrounds it, a shroud you can't really see from the outside. Make it to the top and you have to fight one of the most beautiful boss fights in the game, ending with a fight in a truly magical and ethereal plane. From outside the main academy, but inside its gates, you can even see towards the realm of Leyndell, despite the bridge sadly being broken. I also find it fascinating that getting trapped by one of the abductor virgins in the academy brings you all the way to Volcano Manor and Mount Gelmir if you're so unlucky to be caught by one of them, although the teleportation game design aspects of this is something we could discuss at length elsewhere. For all of its amazingly magical and unique aspects, atmosphere and vibes by the way, which feel so unique to Elden Ring compared to say the Soul series, the Academy of Raya Lucaria deserves the bronze medal and spot number 3 on this here list. At number 2 and the silver medal for second best Elden Ring area goes to Nokron the Eternal City and the surrounding Siofra River. As you might know by now, I adore an ethereal atmosphere and a heavenly or otherworldly shroud. And if you add on some ancient ruins of a lost civilization and stick it all underground to boot, but make it all look like it's actually under a starry purplish sky, you pretty much end up with Nokron. One of the mind-blowing things about this place is honestly the simple act of how you discover it. I remember going about my business in Mistwood, finding this mausoleum-type building, entering it and standing on its platform, only to be taken further and further down until the moment you're able to see beyond the confines of your magical elevator and you're finally made aware of just a fraction of what awaits far beyond. The music in Nokron varies between two themes. When you enter it from Nokron itself, meaning the more cityscape-like part, you hear the same melody as in Nokstella, this dark, creepy atmospheric tune that's meant to send shivers down your spine, and it has a feeling of being haunted and left to rot. But when you leave the city itself and enter the open area of Nokron, often called the Hallowthorn Grounds, the music and atmospheric sounds change to this calming, ethereal, ancient-sounding tune, almost hymn-like but without actual words. There's mystery in these sounds, but interestingly not creepy mystery. In comparison to Nokstella's music, it's almost like being coddled in a blanket filled with outer space and a deep dark ocean, while the ruins of the lost civilization brings you back to Earth. It's hard to explain, but I feel comfortable here in a way I don't in other places, and it comes down to this combination of the beautiful colors on display here, the mix between ancient antiquity-inspired structures, and the sounds around you. I love this massive aqueduct that stretches across this entire place, and the fact that you can make your way down from it and back into the Hallowthorn Grounds is awesome. I love the scenery of Mogwin's palace in the distance, even though I wish there would be some sort of natural way of getting there from Nokron proper. I believe there was a way once upon a time, but as the ruins show, they have long since crumbled. Despite offering a few merchants at various places, I do regret that Nokron doesn't offer more in terms of NPCs though. Blythe ends up there at the beginning of his mission with Ronnie, we meet Dee's twin brother here, and Vare shows up at Mogwin's palace. What's kinda sad is that I always thought this guy, who stands across the broken bridge below the palace, was an NPC. In fact, I thought he was Dee's brother, but he turned out to be just a regular higher tier enemy. It's a shame because it would have been so cool to meet someone down here who were native to this place and who could add some valuable information or revelation to it that we currently do not have. But again, for all of its lovely and unique atmosphere and wholly special underground ancient shenanigans, Nokron and the Siofra River rightly deserves the silver medal and second spot on this list. And now for the gold medal, the first place and the winner of best Elden Ring area of all time goes to none other than Liurnia of the Lakes. This to me is peak Elden Ring no matter how you spin it. Entering this place for the first time was when I truly felt like I was experiencing something truly different, as if even after almost a dozen hours of game time that I had at least a few dozen more. Liurnia of the Lakes offers the best beautiful piece of scenery in the game, but its trick is that it never stops offering them. You can be literally anywhere in this place and you'll find a view to fall in love with, whether that be taking in the sights of the Academy, of Mount Gelmir, or anywhere else really. I love its forked path with multiple waypoints, as you can actually go left and hug the mountainside, go right down the mountain until you reach a grand battle with a magical giant conjured out of nowhere, only to reach a broken bridge closer to the Academy, or the middle section over the lake itself, which features one of my favorite features in any game that includes it, the fact that you're constantly running across shallow water. I swear, ever since I watched Harry Potter running through the catacomb pipes in Chamber of Secrets, I've been obsessed with the sounds and sights of running through shallow water, and Liurnia of the Lakes does not disappoint in this regard. In fact, you have an entire map dedicated to this specific point, as if directed at me personally, and for that, I'll be forever grateful. But more than that, and if you have caught on by now, I love a good, wholesome, magical, and mysterious region. And to me, Liurnia is all of this at the same time. During the day, the lake sparkles in the sun, its green trees wave in the wind, its lush mountains on every side rise so high you can barely imagine it, the Academy is almost always visible no matter where you stand, the Academy town lies in ruins in the water, and Castle Stormvale can still be seen if you ever choose to turn back. At night, the night sky lights up the place, and even though the music becomes a bit more ominous, it's still not bad and retains a lot of that calm, mysterious feel. One of the coolest things about Liurnia is how its size actually ends up tricking you based on perspective and how this region curves, giving it an even grander feel. Picture it, you're standing at the top of the beginning cliff, seeing the Academy in the distance, imagining that that's basically all there is to the region, which still would have been a lot. But actually make it over there and you'll find that once you're seeing the towering Caria Manor, you can't actually see Stormvale anymore. Despite being such an open place, I keep finding myself in situations where I feel ever so slightly disoriented because of this, because the vast distances here play so nicely alongside the mountains, ruins, forests and castles that it somehow feels new and fresh every time. One of my absolute favorite moments playing Elden Ring was in Liurnia when I first made my way through it bit by bit, hugging the rightmost path forward. I made my way to the hill overlooking the Divine Tower of Liurnia, feeling proud after defeating the Mariner boss there. Finding that little shack on the hill, seeing the view from way up there, and just looking at the tower made me so curious and sparked my imagination, because at this point, I hadn't even found my way into the Limgrave Divine Tower yet. I continued on, realizing that to actually reach the tower below, I had to cross this pathway of stone between two mountains, effectively making my way from one side of Liurnia to another. Again, for such an open place, it felt foreign, seeing these fields burning from red butterflies and making my way past a camp of fire witches. Finally reaching the tower, something was off. This table in the main entrance room wouldn't budge, but I tried my best anyway and made my way topside. There, this mini version of Raya Lucaria, but still vast academy-like space revealed itself in the Carrion study hall, and I was attacked by this phantom guy. But the kicker was that he wouldn't stop running away from me, so I kept fighting this bastard from room to room until we reached what felt like the top, where I finally beat him. But even there, I thought that surely there's more to this place. I need to get to the actual Divine Tower out in the sea after all. So I began balancing my way across these beams where rats laid in wait, but other than a few items and such, I was none the wiser. Admitting defeat, I did see a clue though, these magical hands awaiting in a space below me at the lowest level, but nevertheless a space impossible to reach. At that point, I realized that the item I needed would not be found in the tower, and I accepted that I might have to come back in a long time. And sure enough, it would be dozens of hours before I made my return, as opening up this place further required progression in one of the most fun questlines in the game, a quest I hadn't even fully discovered yet. And of course, further ahead, at the edge of Liurnia and the end of its reach, lies the pathway to and the Grand Lift of Dectus. This supremely awesome looking gateway cut into the mountainside of the Altus Plateau, where if you have collected the right items, you too can find a simple way to reach the late game's areas. If not, you can take the hidden path off to the side, which is how I did it the first time. There is so much I haven't mentioned about Liurnia of the Lakes, but if I were to talk about everything, we would stay here for hours. But all of this and more is why I love Liurnia of the Lakes so much, why it's my favorite region in the game by far, and why it wins the gold medal and rank of first place for the best Elden Ring area of all time. That was my list of course, but now it's time for you to tell me yours. Do I have it right or am I way off? Do let me know your favorite place in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, which took a ton of effort and time to make, I'd so appreciate it if you left a comment down below. And did you know that only 0.5% of my viewers are actually subscribed to the channel? If you enjoy my content and want to support the channel, subscribing is really just about the kindest thing you can do, and truly means a lot. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!